My dream, the reality. My dream, the reality. My dream, the reality. Ugh, this is so frustrating. So here's the thing. I am addicted to experimentation. And let's be frank, I'm a cheapskate. The trouble is, I'm a terrible scientist. Great cheapskate, terrible scientist. And what I'm about to explain to you is terrible discipline. I've tried so many experiments all at once that I have absolutely no idea what the root of all my problems is. Let me explain. About 6 months ago, I started to read The Optimum Aquarium, a really popular aquascaping book from the 80s that has largely stood the test of time. I say largely because there are definitely a few exceptions and outdated principles. But my problem is that in order to scratch an itch, I have to see something for myself. And in this instance, that something was substrate heating cables. And despite Dr. Novak himself telling me in the comment section of my cat litter substrate video that it wasn't worth my time, when one day I spotted a cheap second-hand substrate cable in like new condition, well, I just had to buy it. But I couldn't just stop there. This was also going to be my first attempt at a Dutch Style Aquascape, and if that wasn't enough of a learning curve, I decided that I would use laterite cat litter as a substrate. And if you haven't seen my video on this topic, I'll leave a link in the description. So, substrate heating cables, an aquascaping discipline I have never tried before, and cheap cat litter substrate. Surely that was enough experimentation. But no. I also had a brainwave one day about a contraption I wanted to create to power a matten filter for this aquarium. Confused? I know I was. So let me break it down for you. And it might be worth keeping a little tally as I go along. See if you can diagnose what might be causing the issues in my tank. First up, the substrate heating cable. The supposed benefit of a substrate heating cable is that it promotes water circulation within the substrate, washing nutrient-rich water directly to the roots and also, ideally, to a high CEC substrate that can store any excess nutrients. And while substrate heating cables were once a popular choice amongst aquarists for promoting plant growth in aquariums, there are several reasons now that they are no longer as commonly recommended. First, some experts argue that substrate heating cables may not be necessary in modern planted aquarium setups that utilize advanced lighting, CO2 injection, and nutrient dosing systems. These systems can provide enough light and nutrients to support plant growth without the need for substrate circulation, and forums are awash with people saying that they simply did not notice a difference when they eventually switched the heating cables off. On the more concerning side of things, many argue that they can create uneven heating in the substrate, which can lead to hot spots and potential issues with substrate compaction. A final concern is that they can interfere with the natural nutrient cycling process in the aquarium, as they may promote bacterial growth and nutrient release from the substrate too quickly, leading to imbalances in the ecosystem. So after all of that, I bet you're thinking I am mad for giving it a go. But as you can see, it really wasn't much hassle to install, and everything is easily hidden away. Next up, the matten filter. Now, a matten filter is a type of aquarium filter that is designed to provide mechanical and biological filtration for aquariums. It consists of a large sheet of sponge or foam that is placed at the back of the aquarium, typically covering one or more sides of the tank. Water is drawn through the sponge or foam via a power head, or in my case, via a custom air-driven spray bar which I've created out of plastic pipe. I had this idea for a spray bar design that would hang over the top of the foam pad and hopefully create a decent amount of water circulation. On the bottom intake pipe, I drilled lots of large holes all over the pipe, and on the top spray bar pipe, I drilled a bunch of holes in a straight line, getting consistently larger towards the middle to aid in equal distribution. I then glued 2 airline hose fittings into the 2 upright pipes and used a T-fitting so that I could use one airline hose from the pump to connect to both parts of the filter. It was important to use equal length hose from the T so that flow rate out the spray bar is equalized. The design is pretty straightforward to follow, but drop me a comment if you want to discuss it some more. As you'll see later, it works really well. Now, the main advantage of a matten filter is its high level of filtration efficiency and its low maintenance requirements. Once the filter is established, it requires minimal cleaning and can run continuously without the need for frequent media changes. However, there are some potential drawbacks to using a matten filter. One common concern is that the sponge can become clogged with debris over time, reducing its effectiveness and potentially leading to issues with water quality. So I hope you have been taking notes, and perhaps you have some hypotheses for my failure already. But now it's time to get down to planting out this Dutch Style Aquascape, and it wasn't all doom and gloom to start with. As I mentioned, I used laterite cat litter as the bottom substrate for this build, and topped that with a sand and gravel mix. The idea being that the gravel would help avoid compaction and support the substrate heater with water circulation. For several weeks I've been researching the best plants for a Dutch Style Aquascape, and I've been sat up late into the evening with a ridiculous Dutch Style mood board working out my design. I'd settled on the following plants: Limnophilia hyperoides and Rotala nanjensen at the background, Rotala hra and Ludwigia messicana in the mid-background, if that's a thing, Rotala pearl, Ludwigia ovalis, Alternantha versifolia and Didiplis deandra in the mid-ground, Pagostemon stellatus and Alternantha mini in the foreground, and a Micranthemum and Monte Carlo carpet at the front. I'd thought quite a bit about height and textural variation, and I had a pretty good vision of what I wanted the tank to look like. And once everything was planted, I could finally hook up my filter and test everything out. I also hooked the tank up to my fertilizer doser and CO2 system and began to dose the aquarium in the same way I set up all of my aquariums, using estimative index and high CO2 dosage, accounting for oxygen exchange from the air driven filter and achieving a nice lime green drop checker. For the first few weeks, everything was looking great. Now, I don't know if this is the reason or just coincidence, but the moment everything started to go wrong was when I decided to give the tank its first trim. In retrospect, there was no good reason for such an early trim, but some of the foreground plants were beginning to dominate, while some of the background plants were a bit slower to establish themselves. So in order to get a sense of the height variation that I wanted to achieve, I did a fairly drastic trim in week 3. It was shortly after this that things started to go wrong. Firstly, the algae issues were pretty bad. Although not uncommon in the first few weeks as you go through the diatom phase, this was far more than I was used to, with a significant and rapid buildup of green spot algae on the glass. But then, more worryingly, all of the plants started to turn black. Now, from my research, it seems that this could be a result of high phosphorus levels, although there are plenty of people saying that this isn't a thing in a planted tank, since the plants will readily use it as a fertilizer. Plus, whilst I do have fairly high phosphorus levels in my tap water, I adjust my DIY fertilizer to accommodate for this. Another potential reason I considered was excess silicates leaching into the water. The sand I used was play sand, and there is some anecdotal evidence that this can cause issues. But I have used the same sand in plenty of other tanks, and there are plenty of others who say the same sand has worked wonders in their planted tanks too. Linked to both potential diagnoses was the idea that perhaps the substrate heating cable was creating excess leaching from either the sand or the cat litter. But, as is often the problem with the internet, I could find plenty of conflicting evidence and no one consistent root cause. But after watching the tank get worse and worse, I did ultimately resort to adding a filter bag of Seachem Phosguard behind the matten filter. And after about another month, things started to balance out in terms of the algae issues, but the damage was pretty extensive at this point. My Monte Carlo plant was covered in the black algae, and whilst it looked pretty healthy underneath, it wasn't sending out runners to establish itself more. And the black algae was so invasive that I had to conduct a pretty intensive trim and cleaning session, which in my frustration I totally forgot to record. But the upshot was that I have a very sorry looking tank that is completely devoid of any new growth. 2 months have passed since that drastic trimming session, and whilst the water chemistry seems far more balanced and the algae issues have mostly subsided, it feels pretty fruitless to keep waiting for a recovery. It looks as though the root structures are not in the better shape, and that any hope of these plants establishing themselves within this particular setup are pretty far-fetched. So it has left me at an awkward point. I was really hopeful that a miraculous recovery would happen and I'd suddenly have an awesome tank to show you guys. And I'm also left pondering what the real root cause was. Did the substrate heater create too much silicate leaching from the cat litter and sand? Is the matten filter not being adequately powered by the uplift pipe design? Was the play sand too compact to support successful plant growth? Basically, I'm in a situation where I have far too many questions and have conducted far too many experiments. So what do you think is the main cause of all my issues, and what would you do next? Let me know in the comment section below. My hunch is to break this tank down, keep the substrate cables and matten filter, but try a more low-tech dirted tank setup with pond soil and a coarser sand. Fingers crossed I'm not making another identical video like this one in 6 months' time, because it would be really awesome to show you guys my vision for a Dutch Style Aquascape and produce some content that doesn't look like a complete hot mess. But for a project that did work out pretty well, click one of these cards for my 2021 IAPLC Arch into the Abyss Aquascape. The left card is a relaxing cinematic tutorial, and the right card is a vlog-style video charting my journey to submitting that scape for judging. Spoiler alert, it was deemed to be only the 2,389th best tank in the world, but I think it's a bit more beautiful than that.